Julian thought his promotion to senior logistics director was guaranteed. His manager, Silas, spent 2 years loudly defending him to the corporate board. Julian assumed he was protected by an unshakable mentor. Until a weekend server crash dumped Silas's hidden outbox onto Julian's screen. And what he uncovered in the emails left him paralyzed. Julian managed the overnight supply chain for a major pharmaceutical distributor. He spent his graveyard shifts isolated in a fluorescent-lit dispatch booth, surrounded by the constant hum of industrial cooling fans. Silas was the regional vice president who had hired him straight out of college. When high-value inventory started disappearing from the loading docks, Silas personally intercepted the corporate audits. Silas told Julian he was stepping in to protect him from aggressive executive oversight. Julian willingly handed over his administrative login token so Silas could clear the system errors. He thought he was being a loyal subordinate to a powerful mentor. He was actually handing over the keys to his own prosecution. Silas wasn't intercepting audits to protect Julian. He was running a sophisticated parallel routing scheme. Silas used Julian's admin token to access the central logistics matrix at 3 a.m. He redirected truckloads of high-tier biologics to unlisted, off-book warehouse addresses. To balance the corporate ledger, Silas forged Julian's digital signature on the loss reports. He classified the missing millions as routine transit damage and expired cargo. Silas built a massive shadow business on the side, and every single digital fingerprint pointed directly back to Julian. Julian was required to sit through quarterly compliance reviews with external accountants. Silas always sat directly beside him at the heavy mahogany conference table. The auditors questioned the rising damage metrics occurring exclusively during Julian's overnight shifts. They wanted to inspect the physical holding pens for the ruined inventory. Silas placed a reassuring hand on Julian's shoulder and intercepted the inquiry. He verbally defended Julian's work ethic to the accounting board. He blamed the losses on a known temperature calibration failure in the older refrigeration trucks. Julian smiled and thanked Silas for the unwavering executive support. He didn't know Silas was actively holding the off-book financial ledger in his leather briefcase. Silas was using the official corporate audit to test the strength of his own forged documents. The stolen biologics weren't being sold on the open black market. Silas had secured contracts with unlicensed offshore medical clinics. These clinics demanded high-grade pharmaceuticals, but refused to undergo international regulatory checks. Silas routed the stolen shipments through a shell logistics firm registered in a different state. He set up phantom vendor accounts within the company's own billing matrix. Every time a truck vanished from Julian's loading dock, a wire transfer hit a shielded corporate account. Silas was cleaning the illicit funds by disguising them as consulting fees for supply chain optimization. He built a closed-loop money laundering machine inside the company walls. For 2 years, the distribution center operated without a single red flag. Silas continued to buy Julian a coffee every morning on his way to the executive suite. The shadow business ran silently in the background while Julian managed the concrete warehouse floor. The forged loss reports were piling up in the corporate archives, but the daily routine never broke. Then, the dispatch terminal chimed. The weekend server crash bypassed the standard security firewall. A fragmented data dump forced Silas's shadow outbox onto Julian's screen. Julian stared at a 2-year archive of emails sent directly to offshore buyers. Every message contained attached loss reports bearing Julian's forged digital signature. Julian immediately forwarded the archive to the corporate human resources department. The automated response ticket bounced back with a fatal error. Silas wasn't just a vice president, he was the primary administrator for the internal reporting server. He had hard-coded a filter to delete any grievance filed under his own name. Julian realized he was trapped inside a digital cage built by his own boss. Julian realized he couldn't trust the internal corporate network. If he used his company phone to call the compliance hotline, Silas would intercept the audio logs. If he swiped his security badge to enter the executive floor, the access alert would trigger on Silas's phone. He had to operate like a ghost inside his own workplace. He began memorizing the off-book warehouse addresses instead of saving them on his desktop. He took physical notes on the back of discarded shipping manifests and hid them in his lunchbox. The distribution center transformed from a career stepping stone into a hostile surveillance zone. Every security camera on the ceiling felt like a weapon pointed at his back. Julian bypassed the internal network and printed physical copies of the server dump. He took the pages to a private employment attorney on his lunch break. The attorney didn't look at the stolen inventory values. He looked at the dates of the upcoming corporate restructuring. Silas had drafted an executive memo recommending Julian's immediate termination for gross negligence. The memo was scheduled to be sent to the board of directors on Friday. Silas wasn't just stealing freight, he was preparing a human sacrifice. He was going to hand Julian to federal authorities to close the missing inventory gap forever. Julian didn't return to the dispatch booth for his next shift. His attorney drove the printed server dump straight to the FBI field office. Cyber agents immediately recognized the scale of the pharmaceutical theft. They bypassed the corporate security team and issued a federal wiretap on Silas's devices. They monitored the off-book warehouse addresses listed in the Outbox archive. Undercover units photographed unmarked trucks loading stolen biologics at midnight. The feds didn't just have digital logs, they had the physical supply chain. Silas arrived at corporate headquarters on Friday morning in a tailored suit. He walked into the boardroom, ready to present Julian's termination file. Federal agents walked in through the glass doors 3 minutes later. They didn't wait for the meeting to conclude. They placed Silas in handcuffs right in front of the board of directors. They seized his corporate laptop and confiscated his passport on the spot. The Shadow Empire collapsed before the termination memo could even be read. Silas was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for corporate embezzlement and fraud. The pharmaceutical company offered Julian a massive financial settlement to keep the case quiet. Julian accepted the money, but his professional trust was destroyed. He began recording every single phone call he had with future employers. He refused to sign any digital document without taking a physical, time-stamped photograph of the screen. He left the logistics industry and never worked for a corporation again. Corporate loyalty is a one-way mirror. Predators in management don't just steal from the company, they steal their subordinates' futures. They use access and authority to build elaborate digital traps. If that automated server backup hadn't failed, Julian would be sitting in a federal cell right now. How many workers are quietly taking the fall for their boss's shadow business? Drop your state in the comments if you've seen corporate leadership fail your team.